send this out. Can you guys hear that?
Yeah,
Whenever
very official.
it's so official. Whenever I hit that button, it's so loud and it startles me. Um, so I'm going to introduce all of us collectively real quick, and then I'm going to give a couple of little tips for how to handle this evening, and then we'll just get going. Okay, it's so nice to see you all. I know some of you were here with us last week, which is awesome. There's a number of us here tonight, actually. We are Cumberland Counseling Centers. We're so glad that you can join us. Our lesson tonight, our class, is going to be taught by Robert Vore, who, Robert, can you just wave real quick? He's going to introduce himself in just a minute. He's going to be teaching us on an awesome topic, and he does a great job. But before he introduces himself and we play the video, there is a way, if you guys aren't quite familiar, to not just look at whoever is speaking, but to look at many of us. If you go to the top right corner where it says view and click on that button, you can change it to speaker view or gallery view. If it's on speaker view, you're only going to see the one person who's speaking. If it's on gallery view, you can see all of us as long as a screen isn't shared. If the screen is shared, you can see like 5 or 6 people. But that way it feels a little bit more like we're all together and doing this thing together, and you're not only watching one person. Zoom is kind of weird. Zoom's great, but also kind of weird. So that's a little tip that can make it feel a little bit more like we're in a class together. And also Catherine Kessler, who's our site director at our Lawrenceville location. Catherine, can you wave real quick? Do you guys see that Catherine's name is not Catherine, it's actually Private Questions. So if at any time you guys want to ask a question that's confidential, that you don't want everyone else to see, and gosh, believe me, I have those kind of questions. We all from time to time have some confidential questions. So if you just feel a little bit more safe or more comfortable keeping it confidential, then please direct message Private Questions. That's going to go only to Catherine. No one else will see that. And Catherine will share it on your behalf when we're at that time. This is such a great lesson. I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions. So just remember the Private Questions if you want it to be kept confidential. Anything that I'm missing? Okay, so any other questions, as long as they're not confidential, you can like literally raise your hand and let us know that you have a question. Or if you look down at the bottom of your screen and kind of move your mouse around, there's a little button that says reactions, and it looks like an emoji. If you like something that you hear, you can do a little heart emoji or a celebration or something. Or if you want to raise your hand that way, you can hold up the like I have a question emoji from the reaction button. Yeah, just like that. Somebody just did a thumbs up. Oh, it's Robert Vore. And Gay, she's got it. Okay. So otherwise, I think that's it. The only other thing I was going to say was you're welcome to just interject and ask out loud, or you can raise your hand. This can be very social. It does not have to be, awkward and weird. It's going to be a little awkward and weird just because of the nature of it being on Zoom. But we want you guys to be interactive. So please know that you can do that. But in terms of Catherine, who has the Private Questions, she will say, like if you send it at another time, not during the video, kind of during our conversation, she'll kind of interject and say, guys, we have a confidential question. And she'll ask that question when the timing's right as well. Okay, so everyone feel good about that? Show me a little thumbs up or like a thumbs down if you're thumbs up. Okay, we got some emojis, awesome. And then in the chat bar, I love it. You guys are fast learners. We had a question that says, will the video recording be available later? Absolutely. So if you want I'm going to send everyone all of the recordings after all of these weeks are done. But if you want to email and say, how do I get that recording from this, from this week or last week, I can send you each recording. I can send you each one each week if you'd like. Okay, so before we jump into our video, which is going to be fantastic, led by Robert Vore, one of our Cumberland counselors. Robert, will you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about who you are and what you specialize in?
I will. Thanks, Alex. Great job setting everything up so far. Like Alex mentioned, my name is Robert Vore. I'm one of the therapists here at Cumberland Counseling. I'm an associate professional counselor here in the state of Georgia, as well as being a nationally certified counselor and a certified clinical anxiety treatment professional. I specialize primarily with adolescents and young adults, kind of emerging adulthood, so 12 to 30-ish, although I do see adult clients beyond 30. But that's kind of like what I gear towards, what I really have a passion for, which leads to kind of the topic of the day, which is raising a teen with big emotions, right? So kind of that adolescence stage. So yeah, that's me. You're muted.
See, it was
Classic.
me this time.
Yeah.
It's always someone. I was just really quickly saying, guys, Robert is awesome. He really is. I refer to him strangely sometimes as like our resident adolescent therapist. He's the guy that we go to with our adolescent questions. He's so good with them. He has such a good rapport with them, and they trust him usually very quickly and easily, which is such a necessary thing with a therapist. Kids usually don't want to go sit in front of someone who feels like they're going to talk to the principal. So if during the course of our time together, you're thinking, gosh, my teen really does need to meet with someone, Robert would be fantastic, and your teen would be in very good, safe hands. So let's dive in. Are you guys ready to see the video? All right, here we go. Just have to share my screen real quick. Make sure you guys can see this. I think it was playing. It must have been playing that whole time, guys. All right, hang on just a second. Let me stop sharing my screen. Anybody hear any really good jokes lately?
I don't know if I would consider this one really good, but one of the sweet kids I used to name, they asked me, how do you make a tissue dance? You put a little boogie in it.
Ha ha ha.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry to keep you guys waiting. Of course, there's always a little glitch, huh? So for some reason, I couldn't go back and get what we were looking for.
I will fill the space with another corny joke. Why didn't the skeleton dance at the party? He didn't have the guts to do it.
Ha ha ha.
We just want to go wah, wah, wah.
This is Sylvia's stand-up hour. So
Yep.
What can I say? How do you know that the ocean is really friendly? It's always waving. And with that, I'm going to mute myself again. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks for coming.
Save us, video. Save us.
Thanks for keeping it going, Sylvia. All right, here we go. We're going to show this video. And again, so sorry for the wait.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm a therapist, and today we're going to be talking about teenagers and responding to big emotions. We're going to touch on a number of topics kind of within that, right? Including adolescence and what makes that such a kind of unique developmental period, how that plays out, what that looks like in terms of emotional reactions. And then some ideas for what our responses can look like as someone, a parent or a youth pastor or someone who works with teens of any kind, kind of what our options are in terms of responses to kind of big emotional moments. So to start with, when I use the term adolescence, what are we talking about, right? It's important to note that adolescence doesn't necessarily equal teenage years. Adolescence as kind of a unique developmental period can start as early as 8, somewhere in there, kind of at wherever the onset of puberty is for the individual, and can last through somewhere in the range of 25, kind of depending on how we do that. Now, obviously, that varies person to person based on the individual, but that might be helpful in kind of broadening the scope. If you say, I have an 11-year-old who seems to have these big emotions, things like that. So what's happening in adolescence that makes it so unique that it's worth talking about, kind of separate from childhood or adulthood? Classically, we have placed a lot of emphasis on hormones, I think, which obviously some of that is true, but the more that we have been able to do some brain scans and look at people's brains as they develop while they're still alive, we've learned a lot about that. So I want to show you a picture here in the slide that highlights a couple sections of the brain. It's important to note that I'm not a neuroscientist and you're not watching this for like a full in-depth neuroscience lesson. So I'm going to talk in super broad stroke kind of way, just to give us some basic foundational information that might be helpful for the rest of what we're going to talk about. So the red part that you see in the picture is the brain stem that's back down in this area. Controls a lot of the subconscious things that your body does for survival, right? Your heart beating, breathing, all that kind of stuff. It has a lot to say about emotional reactions in terms of finding safety. The blue part that's highlighted is the limbic system, which also has a lot to say about our emotional experiences, as well as things like memory, searching for connection, things like that. And then the green part that's highlighted is our frontal lobes, kind of right behind your forehead, including the prefrontal cortex that has the most to say about things that we might call executive function. Things like planning, sorting, evaluating how different options might play out, things like that. So why show you this, right? When the brain first develops, it does so, again, in a really broad sense, from the bottom back kind of around to the top front, right? If you think about a baby turning into a toddler, turning into a child, you can kind of see that play out in terms of all the subconscious survival things happen immediately. And then some of the implicit memory, the emotional reactions, and then eventually we start kind of growing into planning, understanding kind of the progression of things like that. I bring this up because during adolescence, the brain undergoes kind of this massive process of upgrading itself. It does that to become more efficient, to become more equipped for adult life, right, where we're kind of less dependent for our immediate needs on our caregivers, things like that. But this upgrade happens in the same progression as the brain originally formed. So from the bottom back up through the top front. What that means is that the brainstem and the limbic system are upgraded and are more powerful, running kind of with more capacity before the prefrontal cortex, the executive function type things. So if you think about you were fixing up a car and you upgraded the engine and the gas pedal before you upgraded the steering wheel or the brakes, you might get a rough sense of what's happening during adolescence, right? The emotional experiences are happening at a higher capacity than the front part of the brain that kind of has some regulation on those. So that's helpful for us to understand. So when we are looking at a teenager or an adolescent, right, that we can kind of shift our posture from one of kind of the classic judgments of being dramatic or overreacting, and shift that to an understanding of that they are experiencing emotions at a higher level on average based on their capacity to do something with that than your adult self on average, right? So as opposed to they're overreacting or they're being dramatic, those emotional experiences are more intense based on the development of the brain, kind of all around. Now, that's a good thing when it comes to enjoyment, pleasure, things like that, right? There's a reason why if I polled everyone watching this and said, when was the best music ever made? You would say, when I was growing up, right? You enjoyed it more. But that also means that emotional experiences like anxiety or social rejection, a lot of social things have a particularly strong response, fear, anger, all of those emotional experiences are also heightened and kind of have more intensity on average than an adult would have. As I've mentioned, I'm not a neuroscientist, so we're going to move on. But if you want to learn more about the teenage brain in way more detail, I have a slide that will pop up here with some more book recommendations that go into more depth about that. And there's a link on there to a recommendations page, a resources page on my website that you can find those, so you don't have to like jot them down as fast as you can. So with that groundwork laid, what does that say to us about how we can respond to teenagers' large emotional reactions in helpful ways, right? First, again, I think knowing some of that can help shift our posture some. If you saw that car speeding by that had an upgraded engine and gas pedal, but had like not an upgraded steering wheel or brake pedal, would it be more helpful to say that person is so irresponsible driving around like this, or to recognize, okay, the person that's in there is probably desperately trying to steer this thing. How do I maybe help them with that? Let's shift a bit into like day to day. What are our goals when it comes to responding to large emotional reactions from our teenager or an adolescent that we work with, something like that? There's 3 steps that I want to kind of propose, and we'll dig into each one. The first one is to maintain your own regulation. The second one is to understand, acknowledge, and empathize with what's happening. And the third one is to then choose a response, a next step, based on a couple factors in terms of like what is most helpful. So to talk through this, I want to use an example because I think it might be helpful in understanding what I'm talking about. Let's take a 16-year-old girl named Emily. This is made up. I don't know a 16-year-old girl named Emily, but it's a name I chose at random. Emily comes home from school one day, or logs off her virtual school or whatever, and comes into the living room in tears, full breakdown mode, right? Massively upset. You, as the caring person you are, immediately ask, oh my gosh, Emily, what's wrong? She says something like, me and my best friend Alex got into a huge fight. We'll never talk again. I have no friends now. Everyone hates me. I need to drop out and switch schools. If we can, we're going to pause our mental image right there. Step 1 that I mentioned was to maintain your own sense of emotional regulation, right? So what do I mean? In the moment where we paused it right there, you're sitting on the couch or making dinner or whatever it is you're doing. Emily came in with this whirlwind of emotions. What are you feeling? It's important here to kind of pull apart our internal reaction and our external response in terms of feelings and thoughts, things like that. So in trying to label that, I want to make sure you're staying with emotion words. We're going to stick really basic with I feel blank, right? I feel like I need to help isn't an emotion, it's kind of an emotion and a thought. So we want to stick with I feel blank. Angry, sad, scared, happy, disappointed, frustrated, lonely, rejected, jealous, apathetic, relieved, feeling words, right? Recognizing our own internal emotional experience in that moment can help us to move forward and choose an external response that might be kind of more helpful in terms of like how we're responding, how we move forward, as opposed to kind of a reflexive action based on our internal emotional experience, right? So for example, a lot of us might default to offer Emily some reassurance, right? It's not that bad. It'll be okay. I'm sure she'll get over it. You two have had fights before. We're definitely not switching schools, whatever. It's worth considering whether that is purely because I think this will be the most helpful in this moment, right? If those types of things actually tend to be super helpful. Or if part of that at least is based in my discomfort with the amount of emotions unraveling here, and then I need to kind of fix it or help calm her down because I don't like it when she's upset, right? Kind of my own things there. Those can both be true. I can both genuinely be wanting to help and be kind of acting out of just reflexive, I need to help calm this down, but it's worth checking in. Another good example might be if Emily came bursting into the room in anger instead, right? She busts in yelling, this is all your fault because you made me stay virtual when everyone else was going back, and now I never see my friends and my whole life is ruined. You're the worst parent ever and I hate you. What do you feel in that moment? Anger, hurt, frustration, sadness, right? By paying attention to those things, kind of our internal experience, and slowing down for long enough to pay attention to those, we can acknowledge them, potentially offer a chance for some of the initial spike of that to pass, and we can choose a response, again, instead of just do whatever I've always done, right? You said that mean thing, I got angry, I yelled back, right? Is that the most helpful response, or is that kind of just like a reflex based on my internal reaction? So maintaining my own regulation might mean that I take a few moments to breathe deeply, or let kind of the height of that anger spike pass before responding, kind of pause. And this is important because our nervous systems are always looking for cues of safety or cues of danger. Our nervous systems are always looking for cues of safety or cues of danger, right? Cues of safety from internal or interpersonal or environmental, right, allow my nervous system to calm down, to regain emotional regulation, to shift from a state of survival, fight, flight, freeze, to a state of resting, restoration, and connection. That's a lot of words. What do I mean? I mean that anyone who ever said fight fire with fire wasn't talking about like interpersonal relationships, or they didn't have a ton of experience fighting fire, right? If you come to me with emotional dysregulation and I respond with my own emotional dysregulation, I've contributed to things, and that's going to kind of spiral upwards, right? I think we can all think of an experience where that was the case, right? Instead, I want to try to respond out of my own regulation. That doesn't mean that I squish my emotions down and pretend they're not there, but that I can acknowledge them, right? Process through them if need be, and then choose a response that sends cues of safety, slowing my tone down, my words down, not immediately yelling, right? Things like that, which could help you in receiving those cues of safety. Hopefully helps your nervous system downshift a bit, where we can de-escalate things, we can establish some connection, potentially help you to see things from less of a fight or flight perspective, see things more clearly, things like that, right? So what does that kind of look like? Step 2 that I mentioned was to understand, kind of acknowledge what's happening, and to empathize. Remember, I talked about our default to be reassuring. Instead, we can try for our goal to understand what's happening. So ask more questions, things like that, right? Kind of shift into curiosity as opposed to judgment. Acknowledge they're the expert on their lives. So if they say this was really terrible and this thing is happening at school, they know way more about what's happening probably than you do, right? And then empathize, which would let us validate the emotional experience they're having. Again, I want to point out that the feeling taking place is different than the thought. So if Emily says, "I'll never have friends again," you might disagree with that statement, that conclusion, but you can relate to feeling hurt, betrayed, confused, angry. You can empathize with the emotional experience that's happening, which is a real emotional experience, even if the kind of conclusion that we're drawing from it isn't 100% true, right? But I do still feel quite upset. Empathizing with the emotional experience and validating it is massively helpful in, like I mentioned, establishing the connection there and growing both my and their, the adolescent's capacity to navigate unpleasant emotions, because then we kind of do that together and you get the experience of having navigated it without needing like an instant fix. So responses like, "That must be really hard," or "It sounds like you're really angry with how that conversation went. It really hurts to fight with your friends. I get that," right? Things like that that kind of come alongside and validate and empathize with the emotional experience. As much as we want to correct the statement, "I'll never have friends again," in an effort to be reassuring, they probably won't actually think that statement is true once they've calmed down anyway, right? So if we can think of kind of a storm blowing through, and once the storm has kind of blown through, they kind of regain, and this is true of all of us, we kind of regain a sense of what is kind of real and true here, right? But amidst that kind of emotional storm, we're kind of less aware of that, right? This is why you get in a fight, you yell something, and an hour later you think, "Oh, why did I possibly say that? That was not helpful. That's terrible. I didn't mean that," right? But in that moment, we didn't have quite a clear perspective. This step can contain a lot of listening and trying to understand their emotional experience. And especially if this isn't something you do a lot of, you might not get it right. And that's totally okay, right? If you say, "It sounds like you're really angry," and the response is, "Actually, I'm really scared that I lost my best friend," that's great. That's okay, right? That means, okay, we're establishing this connection. I've shown that I expressed interest in it, in understanding, and you felt okay to like correct me and say, "Actually, it's this thing," right? The goal isn't to be right. The goal is to understand more of what's happening. And then the last step, the third step there that I talked about, is to choose a next step, a next course of action, whatever, based on what's going to be the most helpful towards our short-term and long-term goals. If we get in a screaming match and by the end of it, I say, you're grounded for 6 months and I'm pulling you off the lacrosse team and you can never leave again, that's probably not actually the super helpful next response in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with our lives, me as a parent or you as a teenager, right? Maybe that doesn't actually end up kind of moving towards those goals of raising you to be an independent human being who understands boundaries and knows how to navigate conflict, whatever, right? In our example with Emily, once I've empathized and listened and she's had a chance for some of that storm to pass, which I have helped with by offering kind of a calm, safe listening ear, she might come to the conclusion herself that it's worth calling her best friend and apologizing or being apologized to, or, kind of reconnecting. She might recognize, oh, actually, I do have some other friends. It's okay, right? Those types of things. That's probably more helpful for the long-term goal of Emily becoming someone who can navigate social relationships in a healthy way than if in the moment I'm so determined to fix it that I try to get you to calm down and then I call Alex, the best friend's mom, to see what happened and try and figure things out for her or anything like that, right? It's worth noting that being present, non-judgmental, and having no agenda when someone is upset also helps them to learn that challenging or unpleasant emotions are survivable and they can learn to navigate them successfully by having that experience, instead of unpleasant emotions always need some type of fix, which potentially, we learn to find less ideal ways of coping with those types of things, right? So key points that we want to remember. Number one, we're trying to maintain our own regulation, which will take some practice and dedication on your part to learn more about yourself, how you react to things, what all that means. Step two, to set aside the goals of fixing it and instead to stick with the goals of understanding, empathizing with the emotional experience that's happening, validating, things like that. And then step three, to choose a next step based on safety or priorities, what will actually be helpful in moving towards our short-term and long-term goals. If you enjoyed our time together or found it helpful, want to learn more, I'll point to some more books on a slide here that might be helpful. And again, to that resources page on my website that you can find all of those and more. Thank you so much for hanging out and spending your time here with us. I hope it was helpful.
All right, guys. That was so great. That was really great. Thank you so much, Robert.
That's so much more awkward than I anticipated. Just watching myself just past me talking with his hands way too much. Sorry.
Well, you got a clapping emoji and you also got a message that said such good information. And also one thing that I meant to share before I started the video was, guys, remember that these therapists, Robert, was speaking to a camera. So he did that entire lesson speaking to a camera and still, blew it out of the water. So one person said, good information for folks who don't even have teens. Like, it's just good brain information, So let's open up questions. What questions come to mind for you guys? Again, remember, if you have confidential questions, or maybe you already did, direct message private questions and we can get the ball rolling. What were your thoughts?
I really liked how Robert brought up about you can guess and not get it right, and that's still really helpful and productive. I think that's a really dynamic point. I think it can feel potentially defeating to, take a step out there and then miss, but I think it's such a good reminder that it's not about getting it perfect. It's kind of about opening up a vulnerable dialogue. So I really like that.
I also didn't know that about the prefrontal brain and the stem, and that just helps me have a whole new understanding and perspective, and to kind of not immediately think they should be processing like an adult would process.
Yeah. So I have a 3-year-old. I actually think he's watching. So hi, Gray, if he's watching. So it's actually really funny having worked with adolescents and like knowing that, and then watching him grow up like from baby to like small child, right? Because you can kind of watch the same dynamic play out. If you have a teenager, I'm not saying they're a toddler, so please don't go tell them that that's what I'm saying, but you can watch similar things, right? Where like the emotional responses kind of upgrade before the I can regulate this, I kind of know what the next steps are, right? Like all that type of stuff. So it's I find it very helpful in terms of navigating obviously like my toddler, but then also teenagers, adolescents.
I
I
forgot.
also,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I
Go
love
ahead, private questions.
this is just a comment for me, actually, Catherine, not private questions. Just the point of empathizing with the emotion, because I think sometimes we can have someone share something with us, and it's like, oh, I have not gone through that kind of situation. How do I empathize? How do I understand what they're going through? But we can all relate to pretty much every emotion. And so I think finding and connecting with that emotional experience that they're having is like a great point too.
And also, just to throw this in with the brain comment, I think it can help parents not take things as personally when we're aware of all the emotional stuff that is going on. Because I mean, it doesn't feel good to be told anything harsh or pointed or blamed. And it is just helpful awareness, like, wow, if I give this maybe 30 minutes, an hour of giving time to sit and empathize, or even just de-escalate, when you come back in, you're like, wow, that was a very different conversation.
Yeah, I'll say there's an important phrase where story follows state, right? Which is like the idea that your physiological state determines kind of the lens and the story on how you're understanding things right then, right? So one of those books that I pointed to is by Dr. Lisa Damour, and she actually, in her office, she works with adolescent girls, but she has like a big water bottle filled with water and glitter. And when they come in, she has them shake it and then watch it all kind of settle. And it's this perfect like metaphor for like, right then I don't need to correct whatever it is, like kind of the story that you're saying, right? And by the time it kind of settles, you've also settled a little bit, and then you can kind of see a little bit more clearly, right? Like, and so if we kind of attend to like the state of being, kind of the emotional regulation aspect, then the story will work itself out usually, right? I mean, if you come in and say, I'll never have any friends again, that's clearly not true, but I can be less worried about addressing that in that moment. I can say, okay, let me work with the physiological state, offer some co-regulation, empathize, and the story will kind of work itself out.
At what point in empathizing is it like way out of bounds disrespect to the parent?
Say that again.
So let's say the child says, I hate you. I can't believe you put me in virtual school. You're the worst parent ever. Don't ever talk to me again. Okay, so of course we let them cool off. But then at what point let's say it wasn't just that, how do you manage a proper boundary of respect and not allowing them to cross it?
Totally. That's a fantastic question, right? I think there are ways of holding a boundary while also empathizing, right? Like and in that moment, it may be a little bit different, but I can understand, I can empathize with being really angry and upset while also holding a boundary, right? No matter how angry you are, if you are smashing things on the ground, I'm not going to let you do that, because that is going to hurt you. It's going to hurt me. It's going to destroy stuff, right? And then maybe later on, after you've cooled off, I can say, listen, I definitely understand you that's not an acceptable response, right? We talked about kind of internal reaction versus external response. Hey, next time you get really angry, you can feel anger all day long. That's totally fine. I'm not trying to squish that down. but we need to work on some alternative responses other than yelling at us and slamming your door and whatnot, right? Like I can still work with the external response and say those have to be different. Maybe we can brainstorm some ways of expressing anger differently, but that's kind of that pulling apart the internal reaction versus the external response. I can empathize and validate the internal reaction all day long while still saying, okay, there are other external responses. Like what's your next step? How do you express that anger? Which is probably best done not in that moment, right? Because in that moment, they can't really hear you, right? None of us can, right? So later on, hey, we need to have a conversation about that. What are some ways for next time that we could do that? Here's kind of a punishment based on that response, right? Those types of things.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you.
Oh, good. You're welcome. Thank you for your question.
I'm steadily taking notes here, Robert.
Yeah, I think it can be really tempting when teens start to say really disrespectful things to want to come at them like, you better watch that tone, like, and we kind of want to meet them where they're at. And I think that's what's really important about Robert shared is if we do that, they just continue to escalate. And if you can give that kind of space to calm down, come back in, and maybe you already have a pre-decided consequence for that, and be like, hey, I just want to remind you, we've talked about this and this is the consequence for that, in a calm where you're regulated. And that way there's the boundaries already set. You're not having to hold a boundary or create a boundary in the midst of a chaotic emotional kind of spiral. So yeah, I just want to throw that in there as well.
It's really good. Does any of this apply to like dealing with a 3-year-old, dealing with a 6-year-old?
Almost all of it, right? Obviously it looks a little different, but almost all of, so everything that I talked about in here is something that I'm like trying to practice and work out in terms of my 3-year-old, right? When he's angry, if he throws his food at the wall, that is not like an appropriate response, right? So we have to work on afterwards, like later we say, okay, hey, I know when you feel angry, can we work on some deep breathing, right? Or like you're allowed to stomp, but you can't throw gravy at the wall or whatever, right? Total hypothetical, right? But all of that same type of stuff, right? The idea of like, how do I, as the grown-up, because you can't regulate super well yet, how do I kind of step in and be that regulation for you and help you with that? So can I talk slowly? Can I make sure that my tone isn't super angry? Can I get down on the same level as you, right? Like with kids, that's a really important one, because if you think, I mean, even adults, right? If I'm sitting down and you come in and you're standing, that's like, I'm already in kind of a defensive posture, right? So can I get on the same level? So anything that is sending cues of safety, like I was talking about, right? Things that get read at by your nervous system and your brain as, oh, these are things that would happen when I'm in a safe environment, as opposed to these are things where I'm being attacked, I need to run away or fight back or anything like that. So me coming and yelling, if you're already yelling, no matter how good that feels to me in the moment, is not going to be helpful for what my goal is, which is to de-escalate the situation and to teach you the right way to do whatever, right? None of that's helpful. And so that's kind of on me as the adult to say, how do I learn how to do that with some practice? Obviously, none of us are like nailing it 100% of the time, right? But to try and offer some of that, like I'm helping you regulate.
Yeah.
Robert,
It's very, very hard.
It is very hard. One thing that went into my mind was even therapists. I mean, as therapists, this is a struggle for all human beings because our nervous systems are designed, just like Robert shared, to be looking for signs of I'm in danger or I am safe. And if our nervous system believes that we're in danger, we don't have much control. It's going to act as if we're in danger. And so, Robert, I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. You said, co-regulation in that, or regulating yourself in that moment looks like showing your body that you're safe and not in danger. Can you give some examples of what that actually would look like? To, Gay here in the chat, she said practical steps for regulating your own emotions before responding. And you already spoke to showing your body that you're safe. So what does that actually mean? What would that look like?
Totally. So there's kind of two chunks. We can talk about top-down strategies and then bottom-up strategies. Top-down strategies are kind of from the cognitive aspect, right? So your teenager says, you're the worst mom ever, right? I can remind myself, that's not an accurate reading of the situation. I mean, I don't know, maybe you are the worst mom, but probably not, right? That would be impressive. That's not an accurate. They don't sincerely mean that, right? Like they have big emotions. And then from a bottom up perspective, doing things that, again, your body kind of reads as I am in a safe situation. So things like deep breathing, particularly breathing in through your nose and then exhaling through your mouth, doing the breathing deep into kind of like your belly instead of chest breathing, and making the exhale longer than the inhale, right? For a bunch of different reasons that works. We don't have to unpack all of them, but so like super practically, every time you inhale, your heart rate increases slightly, and every time you exhale, your heart rate decreases slightly. So if I'm exhaling longer than I'm inhaling, I'm slowing my heart rate down intentionally, right? My heart rate decreasing is read as a sign of safety, right? Because if I'm in the midst of a fight for my life, if a lion jumps in here, my heart is going to accelerate, right? Getting a sip of water, or like nibbling on a little bit of protein, something like that, right? Because if I'm in the midst of fighting for my life, my digestive systems have like gone kind of offline. So if I re-engage them, again, my brain goes, oh, you're eating? Oh, you must not be running away from a lion or fighting a lion, right? Kind of like relaxing your muscles, right? So this rectangle right here probably is gonna get a bunch of muscle tension when you're in like fight flight mode, right? Kind of like this, right? When I get really anxious or stressed, it's all like in the back of my neck. So if I can like kind of relax some of those, right? Anything that will kind of cool me down. So like sometimes I'll like open the fridge and just like look in the fridge for a second, right? Like let me just cool off my face, right? Like things like that communicate kind of from a bottom up perspective. I'm not encountering a fight. So when people say like go into the next room where it's like quiet for a second, right? That's probably a great idea, even if you need to say, hey, I'm going to step out, I'm going to come right back and we can talk about this because you're busy yelling or whatever, right? But like removing myself so there's not as much sensory information that is like activating to me, all of those types of things. I know that was a bunch right in a row, but.
I really loved the idea, Robert, of looking in the fridge. I don't know why I was thinking you had one of those like classy
A
two
fancy one? Nope.
fridges.
Nope, just the one.
Because that was one thing on my mind too. If you open the fridge, you're getting the cool sensation, but you're also literally opening up your body, which you would never do if you're in danger. So even sometimes just like spreading out your body or doing a little wiggle dance, I know that seems kind of funny, tells your nervous system that a lion is not going to get me because I'm showing my body physically that it is safe because of my outstretched arms. So even little things like that as well.
Yeah, stretching. I'll stretch like when I get really frustrated, like this yawning one, right? Like that one you do when you wake up, like stretching kind of uses some of that energy and then also is like a safety type thing. Yeah.
I have mine muted. We have a private question that just came in. They said they really like the point of not just trying to fix everything, but do you have any suggestions for being proactive to teach teens about real potential dangers? And the example used here was maybe teaching a teenager who's been a little bit more sheltered about human trafficking or like having some of those more serious conversations.
Yeah, I think proactivity is helpful, right? Like having those conversations, like we talked about, not right in a moment. If you're trying to storm out the door and I say, hey, don't speed, that's not getting anywhere, right? So being proactive about that and doing it in like a realistic way, right? What are some potential warning signs of X thing, right? So, human trafficking, what are some, like, if you see these things, what would you do, right? Having some sense of a roadmap for like, if you see these 3 things, maybe you would then call this person or do this, right? Like those types of things. A lot of that type of stuff. In terms of other types of kind of classic teenage things, right? Like speeding or drug use or whatever, right? A lot of those, emphasizing the potential negative outcomes don't seem to be super helpful, because teenagers are well aware of negative outcomes, but in that moment, the like social aspect kind of takes over. So in a lot of different areas, we kind of want to like put them in better situations is going to end up being the better long-term idea. But I would say like talking through different options, things like that, and doing so when everybody is like calm and things like that.
Yeah, it seems that a lot of times the convenient time in our brain to bring something up is when it's like we're reminded about it. So we'll be in the middle of this discussion where maybe tension is high, or we're like, oh, I've been thinking about this for a while, but the team doesn't know that. But now we're getting in this discussion about this thing, and I want to bring all this information that I'm like hoping that they learn, but actually setting aside time and connecting in other fun ways, and then being like, I really want to talk to you about the dangers of sex trafficking, and like let's really talk about what this is. And just in a total, it's the same thing what we talk about with couples and conflict is we're reminded of something we don't like, and that's the moment we go in for the jugular. I really don't like it when you do that. But it's actually so much more effective if we can calm down and come back and say, hey, I have some feedback. I was wondering if now would be a good time. And just kind of teaching in that way and just reminding ourselves, kind of like what Robert shared of, we have to be aware of like, what am I feeling? I'm feeling threatened, and I really want to just come at them with the reasonings why their behavior is dangerous or inappropriate. But we want to kind of come in a calm space where we're showing them respect, and hopefully, ideally, that will be returned, and some actual ingraining in the brain, that learning can take place where it's not just flooded in emotion, because then a lot of the stuff's offline, and that's not going to have the same impact.
Yeah. It's also worth mentioning that the developmental stage of adolescence, what we want for an adolescent is to be bouncing against every possible boundary, because that's like that developmental stage is like, how do I detach from family as main social unit and go be an individual? So like by design, they're going to push against every boundary, and that's okay. That doesn't mean something's wrong. It's just how we can kind of hold those boundaries or help them make good choices, which I don't love the phrasing a lot of things as bad choices. They're just using different information, different things to weigh that. But like pushing against all those boundaries, same as a 3-year-old, right? He's pushing against every boundary there is, because he in toddler phase, right? You're going from me and mom and dad are like kind of the same thing to like, oh, we are separate people. How do I exist as like a separate person, even though I'm still in the family, right? So same thing in adolescence. I'm trying to detach and go do my own thing, figure out my own identity. That doesn't mean that's a bad thing. That just means we need to be able to know what to do with some of that.
Ooh, that comment was on fire. I don't know if you saw all my emojis, but that was great.
A little heart. Well, you're the friend that was really mean to our camera woman, Emily. Those were the 2 people in the room with me, just for context.
Robert and I, during the video, were kind of laughing at each other because Emily was the videographer and I was the only other person in the room. So he used Emily and Alex as the 2 teen examples. Well, guys, this has been fantastic. Any last confidential questions or any last questions you guys want to speak from your face or chat in the chat box?
You might have said this already, but where did you say we could hear again the recording of this?
I can email it to you. So if you want to, Cindy, if you want to email directly back to the Addressing the Elephants email that you got this afternoon, and say, can I have a copy of, both recordings or whichever recording, then I can send those to you.
The email address says no reply.
Oh.
Cumberland Community.
Well, that stinks. Well, Cindy, I will find you in a very non-creepy way. I will find your email, or you can direct message it to me, so that we don't have another Mike Hamilton mistake where you have to share it with everybody. Just direct message it to me and I will send the links to you. But I do want you to know that I'm going to send all of the recordings to everyone at the end of at the end of June, basically. I'll make sure everyone has access to all of them.
Alex, real quick, I put my resources page in the chat as well. That's the link that has all those books that came up. If you were like, I can't jot down 4 books at a time, that's why I put it on there. So you can go there and it has all those and like a bunch more. But just if anybody's curious, like, what were all those books?
Love that. All right. So you guys heard from actually a number of us therapists, and our participants have kind of gone up and down. People keep entering, and then some people have to leave early and things like that. So the therapists who are here from Cumberland, just to your comfort zone, can you guys just introduce yourself really quick and give us a little bit of like what would be the type of client who could visit you? If anyone in this class is thinking that counseling would be a good idea, it would be great to kind of know who everyone is. Can we start with you, Sylvia, just because you're right there in front of my face? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Sylvia. I am particularly working with adults and some adolescents and some teens. I love working with anxiety, mood disorders, interpersonal issues. So that can be family of origin issues, complex trauma, boundaries, kind of really any of those things are where I find myself, spiritual related issues and desires. And yeah, so that's me.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Frank?
Yeah, my name is Frank Collins. And I work with families and individuals. So I work with like teenagers and their parents, sometimes teens individually, work with couples, anxiety, depression, spiritual issues, relational conflict, those kind of things. I think all of us, we do like virtual and in person, and I'm in the Lawrenceville location.
Awesome. And then Michelle, I want you to be able to introduce yourself as well. Can you share a little bit about who you are?
Sure, I can. Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Robertson, and I'm actually an intern at the Smyrna office. And I don't specialize yet, but I intend to specialize with substance abuse issues, self-esteem issues, boundary issues, and I'm available on the weekends and the evenings. So.
Amazing. And then Catherine, I wanted you to go last because you play 2 very big roles. So could you share both of the roles that you play over there in Lawrenceville?
Yeah, I'm Catherine Kessler. I'm the site director of our Lawrenceville location, and I'm also a therapist here with us. And I work mostly with late adolescents and adults, mostly in issues around life transition, spirituality, anxiety, grief and loss, interpersonal issues. So.
Awesome. And then Robert, just one more time, will you I'm just kidding. We all know who Robert is and he's fantastic. So that's everyone. So the people who kind of popped up and had more therapeutic things to say, I know you guys already knew this, but we didn't have as many therapists with us last week. So I wanted you to know that these are not people just, speaking from that book they read 2 years ago. These are trained professional therapists who are part of our Cumberland Counseling Center. So if at any time you think that counseling would be a great idea for you, for your child, for a loved one, please reach out anytime. You can reach out to counseling@cumberlandchurch.org, or you can reach out to Catherine Kessler at cumberlandchurch.org. And Catherine, you've got another email they can reach out to as well. Can you share that?
Yeah, there's also a counseling@gatecityatl.com. And that's for our Lawrenceville location.
Awesome. Well, guys, we did it again. We are perfectly ending right on time. Before we go, does anyone have any last thoughts or questions? Amazing. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Reach out to any of us anytime. You can visit us on our website at cumberlandcenters.org and make an appointment with any one of us if that's something that you're looking for. But other than that, thanks for joining us. And Robert has one last thing to say.
And we'll be back next week with another one, right? We have more weeks.
Yes, thank you so much. We have our next week, next Tuesday at 6:30, we'll have a panel discussion with all of us therapists I think all of us will be there, on boundaries with social media and your phone. So it's really just like a lively, comfortable conversation between all of us on the topic of boundaries with your phone and social media. So we'll see you next week right here at 6:30. Please join us again. Thank
Hey.
you, guys.
If I could say real quick, Robert, that was fantastic. I feel like that was a very concentrated power pack information in a very compact way. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad.
I knew you would. Everyone's kind of bouncing off, but I usually say, I'll stick around and anybody else can stick around if anyone has kind of like a last thought or, they kind of want some alone time. It's kind of like standing in line at the door. I had one last thing I wanted to tell you about.
Okay.
But I think maybe Brooke is chasing after a 3-year-old and Marlene might. Oh, there she is.
We're here.
Hi, buddy.
He's been waving at me the whole time.
Hi,
He was
buddy.
what?
He's been waving at Robert. I kept being like, he can't hear you, bud.
That was probably really special to be able to see Daddy do his work.
Oh, you got to see Daddy? Yeah.
That is so cute. I love it.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night. Thanks for joining us, Brooke.
Yeah. Thanks for letting us.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks for all your input. This was awesome. So good.
Well done, Robert. That was
Did a
awesome.
great
Yeah,
job.
that was really good.
Thank you. Thank y'all for hopping in. It's great.